You want higher taxes.
I do. I think that at least the wealthy need to be
And what does that
paid
mean
higher
to you
taxes.
when you say higher taxes?
Well, I think that the top rate right now is as low as it's ever been, and if I'm paying a lower effective rate than my assistant is, it's something that seems to be fundamentally not right.
Okay, so what's a fair tax for the millionaires?
You know, I wouldn't.
Patriotic millionaires.
I wouldn't put a number on it. I would say that what needs to happen right now is for there to be a fulsome conversation about what seems fair, because what we've been driving for decades now, is a massive amount of inequality. And so the bottom half of the United States, the working class, has been dipping lower and lower and lower, many of them into negative net worths. And that, you know, given the 1950s and 1960s, when my grandfather and great uncle built that company in a thriving economy, they had a middle class and a working class that could send their children to school, could drive on roads that weren't...
There's an argument to be made, though, that during the 1950s and 60s, post-World War II, effectively the U.S. was a monopoly power, didn't compete on an international stage in any meaningful way. Because we were a monopoly power, we could charge monopoly rents.
That's not the issue. The issue is there are all you always make this point that it was easy back then, but there were write-offs. No one paid 90%. The write-offs...
No one paid 90% effectively. They still paid more. They paid up into the 40s effectively.
But right now, the top, I don't know what you consider wealthy. Do you consider 1% wealthy or not?
I'd say the top 0.1% of people are
1%.
rolling in money, and they're rolling in money in a way they haven't been rolling in money ever in the history of the world. Bezos, Buffett, and Gates own more than 50% of Americans.
But we have a progressive system, so the top 1% pay more than the bottom 90%.
Right, but the top 1% also own and earn more than...
They pay 40% and they own 40%.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we have rules about private property, and that's the way, you know, since the 17th century, that's the way things work. That's the way you're able to own an idea, you commercialize it, capitalism, all these good things happen. The GDP of the world went from 2,000 or 200 a year to 60,000 a year based on private property ownership.
Right.
So, do you want to do something with it? Well, you are sort of.
But what let me ask you something. What I am saying is that should my effort of holding and owning stocks and making my capital gains off buying and selling those be taxed at a lower rate than somebody who works for a living and goes to a coal mine every day?
You're talking about capital gains. In other words, those are...
Well, should I be taxing ownership at a lower rate than I'm owning?
If someone amasses a lot of money and then leaves it to charity, are they unpatriotic?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. They're not paying taxes.
No, of course not, but we have all agreed, as a country, we have laws that favor charitable contributions.
Then by definition, it's not necessarily patriotic to pay higher taxes.
No, of course it's not, unless the tax rates are unfair. The problem is that there's a systematic favoring of people who have accumulated an enormous amount of wealth. The problem isn't that individual people should be paying more.
Maybe it's an estate tax issue then, because the people that accrue wealth in their own lifetime do it out of hard work and paying ordinary income, and then they're able to own assets which are then taxed differently.
Many of them do, but many of the people in the Forbes 400 inherited money and started on 30.
What would you do to the estate tax?
Well, with the estate tax, I would certainly, you have to raise the exemption a little bit, and you have to index it.
So the current exemption is $11.2 million.
Right, and I think where it is right now, I think it's good. And that whole mythology about how the family farm gets broken up and everybody is sad, it affects maybe 4 or 5 families in any given year. So that narrative needs to be eliminated. What happens if you lower the estate tax, or you reduce, as many people say, the estate tax, you get a concentration of wealth in families, and you are, I mean, already we have an education system that favors the wealthy. We have a segregated population of wealthy people who are further segregating themselves by living in gated communities and so forth. We are creating a two-tiered society, which we should fear.
How do you make of the argument that that we're in a much more mobile world than ever before, that if you look at what happened in Connecticut, for example, I mean, people have been fleeing Connecticut, obviously, for other states in the United States, but if you actually raise the federal taxes in a remarkably meaningful way, I mean, to the sort of 70% kinds of numbers you abandoned about, people would be on airplanes moving to other countries.
Yeah. You know, my feeling about that is the ones who leave because the tax rates go up here are welcome to leave. Frankly, we don't want them here. Because what they don't want to participate in is a society that is structured around fairness. We do not have a society structured around fairness right now, and the proof is in the pudding. Look at the lives of working class people in America. I talk to workers at Disneyland who can't afford their insulin because they're working at minimum wage. This is unacceptable. And I can't sit back and accumulate wealth because I simply, A, inherited it, and B, have the good sense to simply own it.
But Abigail, this is
at the expense of people.
You're talking about a lot of different things.
I'm talking about a lot of different things.
Minimum wage being raised, whether
Right.
state taxes, the exemption get brought down, whether the basic wages or basic tax rates go up, and then also just taking a look at capital gains. That's
Of course, and so it's hard not to conflate all these things because they're all happening within the context of an attitude and a philosophy of how economics should be done that favors wealthy people on the theory that a rising tide lifts all boats. But some of those boats are super yachts, right? Some of those boats are getting lifted far more than others.
If that's
and so
the worst-
what we
if
need to
that's
do
the
is
worst
look
thing
at
that
all these
happened-
policies across the
If
board
the
and
worst thing
ask
that
ourselves
happens,
what kind
if
of
the
country
worst
we
thing
want to
that
live in.
happens in a capitalist system where it's a meritocracy, where people can do very well, if the worst thing that happens is that a few people get yes, the converse is that it's counterproductive to continuously take more money out of the private system with the very, the intention of having it somehow make its way down to help the people that you're trying to help. But a lot of times it hurts business, it hurts risk-taking, it hurts the job creators that organically allow people to make more money. Do you feel like we got a lot of progress in the 8 years where people were taxed more? When the Fed had to stay at zero, all assets were marked up, so people like you made a lot of money. People like you made a lot of money, but we didn't see any organic wage growth because the economy was slow.
In 2008, we were faced with a catastrophe.
No, okay, I
That
understand.
was the making of the previous 8 years of deficit spending as the result of a very ill-advised tax cut and two
No,
wars.
it was more of a
that
housing
were-
bubble that everyone participated in. And it was
Because of the
also-
tax
We
cut
can
that
do
was
that.
ill-advised.
I have two very quick questions. One actually just relates back to the philanthropy question that Joe started with, which is, there is an argument to be made that actually philanthropy in America has effectively been subsidized by the taxpayer, which is to
Yes.
say that very wealthy people are
Yes.
able to pay for the things that they want to contribute
Right.
towards, but aren't
Right.
necessarily contributing towards the roads and the schools and everything else around us.
Exactly, that's right.
Would you favor, on the very wealthy, some form of a tax or minimize the deduction or some kind of other program around philanthropy? Or do you say, look, what we want to do in this country is we really want to encourage this kind of philanthropy and therefore we don't want to touch it?
The reality is that philanthropy can't create fairness because the problems, the barriers to fairness are systematic and structural, right? So philanthropists are wonderful people. I do a lot of philanthropy myself, but they affect things around the edges and the margins. So they cannot make the kind of large-scale investments in what everybody needs.
And then the other question I was going to ask you is there's a Disney shareholder meeting today, as it
Yes.
happens,
Yes.
and Bob Iger's pay has been reduced by about $13.5 million, I believe. How much of this is about taxes in your mind, or do you say to yourself, you know what, maybe corporate America is being paid too much? How do you balance those issues?
Well, I do believe, as I say, it's hard to separate these things out because they've been woven together in a system that, is systematically
Do you
favors
think that
wealthy.
Bob Iger's overpaid?
I think
You
that
know him.
CEOs in general are
I imagine you
paid
go a lot of Disney
far too
stock,
much. I'm
right?
not gonna come out and say that. But I will say that if your CEO salary is at the 700, 600, 500 times your median worker's paid, then there is nobody on earth. Jesus Christ himself isn't worth 500 times his median
So
worker's
what would
pay.
Walt Disney think of this pay?
I really have no
I've
idea.
never heard a good answer to this, but
Yeah.
why don't you just voluntarily write a check? You're worth $500 million.
Oh, there's
Why-
a good answer to that.
What is it?
It is ridiculous to say that, in fact.
Okay, that's
I
your
find it to be
answer? It's ridiculous?
No, it's not my answer. My
You're
answer
free to
is
write the check
that
though,
the
right?
problems are structural. My measly few $100 million will do nothing to address
Neither will
roads,
the 400. Neither will the
infrastructure,
400.
schools, hospitals.
Neither will taxing the 400 richest families is a drop in the
Rearranging
bucket too.
the tax structure so that our 50% of Americans are not living at negative debt.
Or paying taxes.
They're paying taxes. They will be
Not
paying
income
taxes.
taxes.
Not
income taxes.
Payroll, everything else. Let me just ask one more final question, which is this. Given what you just said, how much do you think this is about a psychological, philosophical view about making people in the country feel that the system unto itself is just fairer, and how much is about actually raising real revenue? And how do you balance those issues?
First of all, revenue needs to be in some relationship to spending, and the spending is out of control, and we do need to reel spending in. I think that will make you happy, John, but
Abigail Disney.
I do think we need to be spending better on things that would benefit the middle class, like education, like infrastructure, like healthcare.
Wouldn't you rather spend your evening in a waterbed?
For a limited time, $189.
Good.
99.
Daddy, can I have a waterbed? Please, Daddy, can I have a waterbed?
Remember waterbeds? You might not, but they were all the rage in the 70s and 80s. And they